Forward. People at the back, if they can just come forward. Yeah. So, good afternoon, everyone. So, we start with the last session of this conference, which is on looking ahead, views from current and upcoming presidencies. To chair the session, we have with us Sujata Mehta, who's a member, Union Public Service Commission. Among the panelists, we have His Excellency Daniel Chuburu, who is the Ambassador, Embassy of Argentine Republic in India. Hideki Asari, who's the Deputy Chief of Mission, Embassy of Japan in India. His Excellency Saud Mohammad A. Al Sati, who is the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the Republic of India. And Andreas Bauer, who is the Senior Resident Representative in India in the IMF. Over to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The distinguished members of this panel have already been introduced, so I don't need to do that. But I think we're very fortunate to have with us the Ambassador of Argentina, the current chair of the G20, and the next two G20 presidencies. So in that sense, we are very well placed to get a very informed set of perspectives on what we can expect out of the G20 over the next couple of years. We also have the resident representative of the IMF, which is in a sense the strongest resource that the G20 has, since there is no permanent secretariat for this grouping. In terms of the organization of presentations, I propose to request the representatives of presidencies as they come. In other words, we'll start with Argentina, go on to Japan, and conclude then with Saudi Arabia. So, Ambassador Chuburu, the floor is yours.
Which one is this one? Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much. Let me start by thanking the organizers for giving us the opportunity of sharing a few minutes with you from the viewpoint of the presidency of 2018 of the G20. In this regard, I will let you know from the very beginning that I will not, or it's not my intention to deal with the financial issues or the trade issues involved or any specific issues in particular, but I would like to be much more oriented to a political view of the G20 and the perspectives of the work from the presidency of the group. In this regard, let me start by saying that this year we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the G20, and I think that the first thing to be said is that we are facing a completely different scenario that it was prevailing at the time of the creation of the group. At that time, the group appeared as a reaction to a crisis. Nowadays, we're facing very difficult situation, but it's not still a crisis ongoing. But of course, that nowadays we are facing an increasing protectionism, which is creating a lot of tensions. We are we are facing very difficult threats to multilateralism, higher oil prices, currency tensions, a decrease in the level of global trade. So the scenario is completely different. Let me say that for us, in 2008, the G20 was very effective to deal with the crisis that was in place. And basically, their agenda was related to the crisis and the situation or the equilibrium of the macroeconomic situation. With the years, that has changed, and we have been incorporating to that view some more global issues or political issues. When we came to the presidency of the group, our president announced what was going to be for us the theme of the G20 for this year. In this regard, as you all know, the issue that was selected by us was building consensus for fair and sustainable development. What does this mean in terms of why we choose these? Well, we think that consensus is one of the first aims that the G20 has to have. And we were coming from a situation in which we thought that concept, and particularly in past experiences, that concept was getting a little lost. So we thought that we had to have a stress on consensus. The question of fairness, or lack of it, refers mainly to the benefits of the process of globalization, in which we feel that has not been equal and fair to all. And this has created a lot of instability and a lot of socioeconomic crisis in many parts of the world. So we believe that the concept of fairness was to be present in our theme, and this, of course, is with the goal that we have that no one has to be left behind. So that was the main issue that brought us to have this. And the concept of sustainable development, I believe that this is exactly one of the things that for us was keen to introduce here, because we think that we are trying to build this presidency, or we tried to build it during this year, incorporating the views of the South. And for the South and the countries of the South, and we have been trying to inject this kind of view into the discussions, the question of sustainable development, it's very important. It also refers to the responsibility towards our future generations. So us, as developing countries, feel the need of having this tool. So that was the way in which this was created. The vision that we have as the presidency, as I told you before, and it's referred there, is this balancing role that developing countries have to have, and the views from the South, and our commitment to multilateralism, dialogue, and the seeking consensus in our relationship. We do believe that these two tracks, in which usually is divided the idea of the G20, they have to be part of the same holistic view. It's very difficult at this point in time to have a political view without dealing with the financial sector, or a financial view without dealing with the political section. We think that there is such an interlink. In our case, our Sherpa comes from the Ministry of External Affairs, and of course the people from the financial track come from finance, but in all the meetings, our Sherpa from the MEA is present in the financial meetings and the other way around. And they work together as a team, because if not, we don't get the approach in a time in which, as I was mentioning before, we're facing, for example, threats to multilateralism or the question of what's going on in the sector of trade, or the crisis in the trade sector, with all the harassments that are being today shown every day in the papers, and the trade wars that are being foreseen between some of the members. So we think that that's very important to maintain these two tracks, but to make them converge. Also, we think that G20, the main important thing that it has is that it's an informal mechanism, and that has to be kept like that, and it's not for the it's for the G20 to replace any existing organization. And of course, with all this being said, we think that it doesn't have to have a secretariat. It has to be kept as it is, as an informal mechanism of summits of the leaders, and not have the temptation of becoming an international organization. This is also linked to the question of implementation, and in this regard we are convinced that there is nothing to be done by the G20 itself in the question of organization, but it's a question that the recommendations being given by the summits have to be implemented by the member countries or the existing international fora. And the most important part of the G20 is the exercise or the dialogue between the leaders. This is a leaders-driven process. It's not a secretariat that is imposing, it's the leader. It's the opportunities for the leaders to meet and discuss among themselves, because, of course, all of these agendas that we prepare when we take over the presidency, it doesn't reflect the reality of the day the leaders are meeting. You start working a year before, and as in the case of this year, it has been a very active year in which a lot of things have been happening in the last few months. So you have to have that kind of flexibility. The leaders, they meet, and they have the opportunities of part of the work being done by the different working groups, which we believe they have not to proliferate more than they are. But the leaders have the opportunities of themselves dialogue among themselves. That's the political advantage of a group like this, and that's the political need that we have. Leaders to get together and tell us their views on this situation. For the presidency of Argentina, we have chosen three key issues. One is the question of the future of work, that means jobs. What do we think of the future of jobs? Infrastructure for development, and sustainable food future or food security. In the case of the future of work, we do agree that there is a new industrial revolution going on, and that the new digital technologies are pushing a lot on the jobs as we know it from today. And although we have had a very good impact of all these technologies in the growth of the economies, they also have the other phase in which they, in some cases, are leaving people without a job in some sectors, automatization, for example, and all of that. The question is how we linked this revolution, this new industrial revolution, to the creation, to education, and how education has to be oriented to the creation of new skills, skills that are needed for the new economy that it's coming out of this new industrial revolution. So we do firmly believe that it's a question of thinking together, all of us, on what are these possibilities of developing new skills. Even we have to train our kids for things or for jobs that we don't know what are going to be in the future. One kid that is now in elementary school, where are going to be the opportunities for him when he gets to the job market? It's very difficult. So we have to train them in a way that training the skills he might need for confronting that new situation. The other issue is infrastructure for development. Although this is not a new issue, how you finance infrastructure, the question is that what we want to put here, the emphasis, is in how infrastructure has to be oriented for development. And this comes again, the vision of the South. And it's how we need to develop. And for that development, it's crucial that we increase the infrastructure in our countries. There are a lot of studies around there that talks about $5.5 trillion deficit or gap in the infrastructure sector. So we firmly believe that one of the things that might be useful for the G20 doing is how we can develop new ideas so as to finance that creation of infrastructure. Of course, the only possibility that we have at this point in time with the existing gap is to look for the PPPs and involve the money that it's in the hands of the private sector. And only with these private-public partnerships are going to be a possibility of financing the gap that we have. And this, of course, when we talk about infrastructure, we talk, and there's a reference there, to all sectors that are involved: transport, energy, urban infrastructure in a very ample way. In the case of sustainable food future or food security, we firmly believe that this is a very important issue. 60% of agricultural land and 80% of world trade in food and agriculture falls under its members. So the members of the G20 have a big responsibility on how they can assure this food security for everyone. In this regard, we firmly believe that there are two issues in which we have to work together, and that's concerning soil management in a sustainable manner and increased productivity in different ways. So there are areas in which we think that the cooperation that can be created and the help, the cooperation coming from members of the G20 has to be mainly in these two areas of soil management and productivity itself. This, in addition to these issues that have been dealt with in the different levels of the G20, I just wanted to show you how this has been growing and somehow where the dangers are of growing these mechanisms too much. In addition to the meeting of the financial track on one side, the Sherpa tracks on the other side, and the summit, we have official groups that are already going on there, like the B20, which is concerning to business, C20, the civil organizations, T20 for the think tanks, S20 for the science, W20 for women, Youth 20 for young people, and L20 for labor sector. In addition to these, we are having meetings this year in Buenos Aires in the two other powers of our democratic system, which are the P20. They are not called the P20 yet, but they are parliamentarians of the G20. And on the other side, there's also going to be a meeting of the judiciaries of the 20. So with this, we are covering all. These two last meetings, the parliamentarians and the judiciary, they are going to have their own agenda. It's good that they get together, but it's not necessarily an input for the rest. But this is the kind of proliferation that you can see in this organization. In addition to these points of the agenda that I mentioned before, and which are not new, but anyhow are the ones that we have stressed, there is what it is called the legacy agenda, which are the issues that come from the very first meeting and that have been incorporated by different views in different times. In these, you have empowering of women, the main financial issues, climate action, which is after the last report of the International Panel on Climate Change. I think we have to give a little bit more of attention to this sector. The cooperation on trade and investment, which is other areas that can also contribute to the crisis, energy transitions. There is a lot of specific issues that are part of this legacy agenda, and I will not take more of your time on this. What's the present situation? All the working groups that have most of the working groups have finished their work. There is one of the financial track that it's taking place now in Bali at the same time of the IMF and World Bank meetings. For the time being, we have been able to achieve that consensus that we were seeking in many different issues, including in the chapter of climate change, although there are people that do not agree 100%, but at least there is a document that was brought by consensus. Every issue has been addressed, and this is also related to the question of climate change. It's not that for the time being we have consensus, but issues as that has not been tackled, they are there. And what we are seeking is to have a very short declaration. The declaration is has to be built upon the discussion of the different groups, but it's not just adding up what the different groups have said. It has to come also from what the summit or the leaders are going to address themselves. And just I would like to thank you so much for your patience. Thank you, and I'm at your disposal if you have any question in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's my pleasure now to call upon the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Japanese Embassy, Mr. Asari. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Mehta. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to stand here to share some of my thought on the upcoming G20 summit meetings. And also at the same time looking back the past 10 years and achievements by G20. As Ambassador Chuburu said, it has been 10 years since the inception of the G20 summit. I was actually in Pittsburgh in September 2009 as a part of the embassy team when a third G20 summit was held, and the leaders declared G20 to be the premier forum for their international economic cooperation. The Pittsburgh summit was held still against the background of lingering crisis, and the leader's statement began with a very dire recognition that the world was still in the midst of critical transition from crisis to recovery. The world has seen sea changes since then. Global economic growth is robust and unemployment is at a decade low. At the same time, the world is, of course, not without issue, and we need to be vigilant about the short to mid-term downside risks. And it is against this background that our honorable friends of Argentina will host the 13th G20 summit in November, the end of November. Already various ministerial meetings has been held, which include 4 rounds of finance ministers and central bank governors meetings. And the latest one, as Ambassador Chuburu said, is now just being held in Bali, yesterday and today. and discuss such topics as the risks to the global economy, or making international financial architecture more resilient, and developing infrastructure. And also, G20 foreign ministers also held a meeting in May, and its agenda included multilateralism and global governance and actions for fair and sustainable development. Japan will host G20 summit in June next year in Osaka. Osaka is about 500 kilometers west of Tokyo and has been known as the commercial and business capital for many centuries. G20 Osaka Summit will build upon the achievement of preceding G20 Summit meetings, including Buenos Aires, and Japan will demonstrate its leadership so that G20, which covers more than 80% of the world GDP, will play an important role for strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. Before talking about expectation about Buenos Aires and Osaka, let me just touch upon the assessment of previous G20 summit meetings. As I said at the beginning, G20 summit started as a vehicle to take on crisis. 10 years ago, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008, the world was plunged into the worst financial crisis in decades. A year later, the leaders' statement in Pittsburgh called this the greatest challenge to the world economy in our generation. To stop the dangerous sharp decline in global activity and stabilize financial market, G20 countries agreed to do everything necessary to ensure recovery, to repair our financial systems, and to maintain a global flow of capital. And it worked. Having stopped the deterioration of the crisis, the next task for G20 was to bring the world economy back to track of economic growth and to prevent the crisis from happening again. On these points, G20 has made steady progress. At the Hamburg summit last year, the G20 leaders agreed that the current growth prospects are encouraging, though the pace of growth is still weaker than desirable, and to reaffirm their commitment to international economic and financial cooperation to further strengthen growth and safeguard against downside risks. The leaders also stated that they will continue to use all policy tools, monetary, fiscal, and structural, individually and collectively, to achieve the goal of strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. This policy approach is still relevant today too. On the effort of preventing crisis from happening again, or coping with the crisis, G20 has exercised its leadership, including in financial sector reform, which includes Basel III, enhanced monitoring, and IMF's 14th General Quarter Review, which doubled IMF quota. Experts say the international financial system is more resilient than 10 years ago. However, more fundamentally, G20 has been facing varied and complex challenges of the increasingly borderless and interdependent world. I would not resort to more philosophical question whether the world has become more difficult to govern, but it is true that the anxiety or antipathy to rapid social and economic change at times created temptation for protectionism and sharp division among countries. To this, our Prime Minister Abe emphasized in his press conference at the end of this year's G7 summit meeting in June, Japan's determination to continue to be a standard bearer of free trade based on free and fair rule, and the importance of inclusive and sustainable growth. As a premier forum for international economic cooperation, G20 has been playing an important role on challenges of global economy, from how the world can continue to uphold a rule-based international trading system and reap the benefit of free trade, to the issue of environment and energy to make the growth sustainable. Addressing inequality and how to achieve more inclusive growth is another challenging one. There is no silver bullet, but the very fact that leaders of the world's major economies meet regularly and seriously engage themselves is a manifestation of collective responsibility. It is right to say that G20 has evolved from a vehicle for taking on immediate crisis to a vehicle for such collective responsibility in this increasingly challenging world. Now, let me touch upon our expectation for G20 Buenos Aires, which already Ambassador Chubur elaborated. He mentioned 3 priority areas, and we believe that these are all challenging topics the world faces today. We need to make sure that technological innovations such as IoT, AI, and big data create more opportunities for people. And as regards the infrastructure, while the world demands for infrastructure is huge, we should all bear in mind the importance of quality infrastructure. Japan has been an advocate for quality infrastructure, including in its G7 process, and in EAS process, and in G20, and in various other fora. We believe that it is important that development and use of infrastructure is done in an open, transparent, and exclusive manner based on international standards. As regards food sustainability, Japan also attaches importance to food security and sustainable agriculture. The Buenos Aires Summit will be another important opportunity for G20 to demonstrate its collective responsibility, and it'll be an important milestone to Osaka next year. It'll be 7 months between Buenos Aires and Osaka, which is a rather shorter interval than usual. But our colleagues in Tokyo and Buenos Aires are closely working together. Then, what will happen for Osaka, G20 summit? It may be too early to talk about Osaka summit next June, given that Buenos Aires hasn't even finished yet. The agenda for G20 Osaka summit will be decided taking into account the discussion in Buenos Aires and international political and economic developments. Having said that, there are remarks made by Japanese political leaders which could be pertinent in the context of G20. First of all, last month, Prime Minister Abe wrote an op-ed on the Financial Times of the UK titled, "Join Japan and Act Now to Save Our Planet." There, the Prime Minister warned the exacerbating problem of climate change and called for all the countries to engage with the same level of urgency. He also addressed the need for innovation, introducing Japan's effort to create such future-oriented technologies as ultra-high-capacity storage batteries, and called for further work to cut the cost and improve the reliability of renewable energy. He emphasized the importance of investing in energy transition and sharing economy as ensuring economic growth and dramatically reducing greenhouse gases. At the end of the op-ed, the Prime Minister said, Japan will preside over G20 next year and focus on accelerating the virtuous cycle of environmental protection and economic growth. Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, on his part, in one of the Japanese publications, refers to some of the topics which could be taken up in the financial track of G20 process. These include quality infrastructure investment, which will lead to sustainable development of developing countries facing enormous infrastructure need, debt sustainability of low-income countries, and coping with aging society, on which Japan can share its experience and insight as thought leader. In May this year, at the conclusion of G20's Foreign Ministers meeting in Buenos Aires, Foreign Minister Kono, in the joint press conference of G20 Troika, stated that the next year's Foreign Ministers meeting, based on the outcome achieved under this year's Argentinian presidency, Japan would exercise strong leadership in sustainable and inclusive growth and stability, as well as leading efforts to tackle global challenges in the face of growing inequality. These are some of the issues mentioned by our political leaders. While the agenda for G20 Osaka Summit will be formulated in the wake of the Buenos Aires Summit, the world expects G20 to continue to discharge collective responsibility for the world economy. While G20 Osaka Summit will be at the apex of G20 meetings in Japan next year, Japan will host 8 ministerial meetings starting from Agriculture Ministers meeting in May followed by finance ministers and central banks governance meeting and ministerial meeting on energy and transition and global environment in June in a run-up to Osaka summit. After the summit, there will be 4 more ministerial meetings before Japan's presidency year will be concluded by foreign ministers meeting in Nagoya in November. So, a bit early to talk about Osaka, but maybe you can kind of have some image what would possibly take place. And first of all, I think we have to concentrate on Buenos Aires, and G20 countries are working together for its success, so that we can have this as a jumping board for Osaka G20 summit. My handout said, after this Osaka summit, omotenashi, Japanese hospitality. Omotenashi is a Japanese word meaning hospitality. And we believe this is a really important opportunity for us to share various charms of Japanese culture and food and so forth for many visiting people. Of course, they will come to Japan for work, but I hope they can enjoy some of the nice part of Japan as well. In conclusion, I would like to sum up that the past 10 years have seen G20 evolving from a crisis management phase to a platform for policy coordination in the increasingly complex world. Challenges we face do not allow easy solution, but G20 countries have collective responsibility to act together. Japan will play an active role as the next year's presidency so that G20 will fully discharge its responsibility as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. And last but not least, just an advertisement. I put my handle on my handout, which is at Hideki Asari. I usually put up a policy updates or information on upcoming events, be it intellectual or cultural or whatever. So if you're interested, please follow me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Asari. It is my pleasure to now invite Ambassador Al-Sardi, who represents the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will be chairing the G20 in 2020, and he will give us a perspective on that. Over to you, Ambassador.
Well, assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking ICRIER for organizing this very important conference on G20 and its agenda, and I had the pleasure actually of attending the opening session and listening to very inspirational remarks by Mr. Kant and Mrs. Ahlawali and other distinguished speakers. And as I was also briefed by some of my colleagues who attended the several sessions, actually, that the sessions and discussions were very deliberative and very, very informative and useful. And for us as a future president of G20, we found these interactions very useful, and we are in the learning mood and the learning process actually in our preparation for G20. And also would like to thank Secretary Sujat Mehta for moderating this session. And as you know, this very long-standing annual forum is an important platform for brainstorming and sharing views across the G20 agenda. It is also a very good opportunity to listen to the Indian perspective on the G20. India has played a key and central role in the G20 agenda. This includes bringing an emerging economy perspective to the G20 and leading central parts of the G20, such as co-chairing the framework working group. I am also very pleased to be part of this panel today, which include a representative from the current G20 presidency, His Excellency Ambassador of Argentine to India, as well as Mr. Asari, representative of the Japanese Embassy to to New Delhi. My brief remarks will focus on the role of Saudi Arabia in G20 as we prepare for our 2020 presidency. I'll speak about our views on G20 and also things and reforms that we're trying to do in Saudi Arabia as we go towards the future, generally speaking, and also towards hosting the G20. Saudi Arabia has been a proud and active member of the G20 since its inception. And the Saudi Arabian economy is built on well-functioning global markets, institutions, and rules. Energy markets are truly international, and Saudi Arabia plays a key and central role in ensuring that the market is balanced, oil supply is sufficient, and that oil price increases are to a large extent driven by a stronger global economy and growth. That said, Saudi Arabia will continue to play its stabilizing role in the global oil market for the benefit of both producers and consumers, including through its role in the OPEC Plus to increase oil production. All of this requires effective global cooperation, and this is precisely why we work closely with G20 member partners. Throughout 2018, Saudi Arabia has been supportive of the program of work identified by Argentina. We were also very pleased to have the opportunity to host the G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion event in Riyadh in July 2018. We also look forward to strengthening our cooperation with 2019 President Japan, and we are working closely with and learning from other G20 member countries, and that will definitely bolster our own preparation for 2020. We are also looking to work closely with relevant stakeholders to hear from them about identifying and tackling the biggest challenges facing the global economy. Challenges where the G20 can add value, a true value, and help resolve these challenges for 2020 and beyond. This is why this conference is so important. As we have heard over the last 2 days and what I have learned from my colleagues who attended these sessions, it is often difficult to find solutions for these problems, but the G20 can have a crucial part in promoting this global economic cooperation. To speak about Saudi Arabia, reforms, and what it's trying to do actually to improve its economy and prepare for the future, including its presidency for 2020, for G20 in 2020. We think that our G20 presidency in 2020 will also be an opportunity to showcase our country to the world and the reforms we are undertaking as part of Vision 2030 and the national transformation programs. Saudi Arabia is undergoing a historical transformation. As stated by His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, we are determined to reinforce and diversify the capabilities of our economy, turning our key strength into enabling tools for a fully diversified future. In Vision 2030, we have the roadmap for the kingdom's development and economic objectives. We are moving in the right direction. And one of the central themes of our Vision 2030 is to build a thriving economy, an economy which is open for business, and we are particularly looking at increasing the private sector's contribution across the economy, increasing foreign investments, raising non-oil exports, and pursuing more quality public-private partnerships and promoting SMEs and increase their contribution to our GDP, and improving government effectiveness and innovation, and also improving our overall competitiveness. By looking at current developments in Saudi Arabia, growth is gaining momentum on the back of very successful implementation of socio-economic reforms and robust global economy. Saudi Arabia continues to maintain strong policy buffers that have been built over the past decade, supported by large physical and financial buffers that have helped in weathering shocks. More recently, the Ministry of Finance of Saudi Arabia issued in the 2019 pre-budget statement, which is in line with the goal to improve fiscal framework and transparency. Next year, government spending is expected to exceed 1 trillion Saudi riyals, around 7% higher than 2018 level, and this will help support economic activity and employment given the strong macro-physical linkages. At the same time, revenues are expected to grow by more than 10% on the back of sustained reform implementation to diversify the economy. Overall, we expect that fiscal deficit to continue declining and to achieve fiscal balance by 2023. I want to take this opportunity to emphasize that our domestic reform ambitions hinge on global cooperation. The G20 has a key role to play here. We can utilize the G20 to help drive the global economic reform agenda and shape global economic rules. In addition, we will look to bring a regional perspective to the G20 table. Saudi Arabia has a unique position connecting 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. And for example, for my region, efforts should be focused on further strengthening growth and inclusiveness while safeguarding economic resilience to external shocks. Strengthening social safety nets is also critical to mitigate the impact of reforms. Indeed, Saudi Arabia has been and will continue to be an important partner to countries in the region, including through its financial support to countries undergoing important reforms. This means the G20 can be a force of good for Saudi Arabia and its people, and for the region generally, and the world. In conclusion, let me finish with this, that we face global challenges, both now and almost certainly in the future. And these challenges underscores the need for global dialogue and cooperation. The G20 has an important role to play, and Saudi Arabia looks forward to an active role in helping find mutual solutions to these challenges, particularly as we host the G20 presidency in 2020. We do look forward to host the presidency of G20 in 2020 with a lot of energy, optimism, and ambitions, and we look forward to welcome G20 members in Riyadh in due time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now invite Dr. Andreas Bauer to give us the perspective of the IMF on upcoming presidencies of the G20. You have the floor.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My co-panelists here, and of course the audience. I know you've had intense discussions already, so toward the end I hope there's a little bit left of battery power to have a little bit of a discussion here. The IMF is always very happy to support this event. We consider the G20 to be an important and very useful forum, and I think, as the chair mentioned at the beginning, the IMF has been intimately linked to the G20 process in terms of supporting it on a technical basis. And I think our key view that really drives us to be involved is that today we live in a more integrated and interlinked world, in a world that's also changing in many ways, where economic power is being redistributed across the world. And in this world, really, what we need is more and different global economic governance. And the G20 is really a forum where that can provide some of that, or can help build and reshape the institutions that provide the global economic governance framework. And so from our perspective, the G20 was, and will remain an important forum, an important piece of the global economic governance framework in the world. Now, I think it's also fair to say probably that the G20 naturally performed better, or maybe had more deliverables to show during wartime than in peacetime. So at a time when the world was facing the same type of shocks and the same pressures, it was, of course, easier to bring everybody together, and I think the G20 played an enormously important role at the time of the global economic crisis of delivering a coordinated and concerted response, and I think there's a lot to be shown. I think naturally, as these economic and financial pressures have lessened, and kind of more idiosyncratic issues or motivations have come to the table, it's of course harder in a consensus-based organization to move forward. But still, even there, I think the G20 process has achieved traction on a whole number of issues that make it a worthwhile process. So with this in mind, of course, my remarks will focus a little bit more on the finance track, naturally, because this is where we are more active. But I will draw maybe a few links to the Sherpa track, or the broader political track, in a way. But so if we look and think about the last few summits, I think it's fair to say that the financial architecture issues have taken a little bit of a backseat since China's presidency. And I think a good part of the reason is that that was the point where actually quite a few of the initiatives that were underway and were debated and were moved forward, it came to a conclusion. And that included the 14th quota review of the IMF that led to a redistribution of quota share and of course a voting share to emerging markets, which was a very important step. The issue of financial resources of the IMF was taken care of with the extension of borrowing agreements. The SDR basket review took place. So a number of very prominent architecture issues came to a conclusion, although some others didn't advance as much. But they have been, I would say, in the last couple of years, a bit less in the forefront of the G20 process. I would also say that the focus on growth-enhancing structural reforms has probably come down over the last couple of years. And again, I think the conjuncture has something to say with that. You will remember that we've been struggling for several years after the crisis to get the global economy growing again. So we had many years of growth disappointments where really the recovery was not on the way, and therefore in Brisbane we had this commitment of called 2 in 5, where essentially member countries committed to engage in structural reforms that would lift growth potentials by at least 2% over the next 5 years. And I would say that process has kind of somewhat cooled down, and it is you can see it through the communiques as well. It is kind of taking less importance in a way. And partly, as I said, we've now seen for the last 2 years a fairly strong global economy with especially advanced economies growing faster than their potential. And maybe that also has taken out a little bit the urgency. So the implementation picture there is a little bit mixed. In Hamburg, I think we had a 50% implementation of the commitments. And that, in our view, is a little bit of a missed opportunity. And you may have heard the managing director of the IMF being quite vocal about the importance of fixing the roof when the sun is shining. So here, I think also the G20 process has slowed a little bit.